So we might begin. So welcome everyone. We're going to cover quite a bit of ground today, and I'm going to be weaving, shall we say, a number of approaches together in recognition that the issue of guru devotion from a Western perspective can be challenging in certain ways, but even putting that aside, it deserves a great deal of investigative respect. So as Lama Zopa Rinpoche is constantly reinforcing in his very beautiful and very special book, which is really the quintessence of the topic, of course. I can't hope to add anything to that. But the fact that this book exists as such a magnificent tome of collected teachings from Rinpoche's discourses over many, many years speaks to the quintessence, the crucial nature of this topic. So it's one with which we have to spend time familiarizing ourselves, but in other ways, in exciting ways, also challenging ourselves to come to terms with the real implications of the topic and what it might mean in experiential terms. So it's this sort of emphasis on our own personal stance that is of considerable concern for me, because I see over the years many students meet the Dharma and they throw themselves at it with a voracious passion, which is of course very wonderful, but then become maybe confused or in some ways thrown out from the patterns of their ordinary lives, and they're not quite sure where they are and what they're to do next. So there is a certain psychological jeopardy that can arise when people become very fervent new Buddhists. And as guru devotion is so critical, particularly in the Tibetan account, which we're receiving in terms of our own immediate lineages, it's really necessary to work out where we stand at a heart level on this topic. Another thing that happens, of course, is that people often feel they haven't got a guru, or they would love a guru. Everyone else has got a guru. What have I done wrong, or how do I go about getting one? And so again, this is a really important series of questions. And another related one is that I had a guru, but I wasn't that impressed. And now I'm looking for another one. What do I do with the other guru? So, some students collect gurus, like you might collect antique vases. And I say that sort of comically because they get themselves into quite extraordinary situations where one Lama says, get married, another Lama says, don't get married, a Lama says, become a Sangha member, another Lama says, just relax and live a householder life. And so some students shop for not only teachers, but they shop for the opinion from the teacher. They're seeking to extract it. And so they'll go from one teacher to the next until they hear what they want to hear. And so this kind of questing can be quite limiting, because it can become a kind of an outer manifestation of one's ordinary ego struggles and strivings. And so we're trying to just incorporate a guru cosmology into our ego cosmology. And this can become very inflated and hard to work with. So for all these reasons, an incredible degree of integrity, self-integrity and self-respect is required, but also a genuine openness to the topic, because it is really the most remarkable topic to consider. So as we have done in the other session, I'll begin with a short Guru Yoga, which I'm basing on this classic Lojong collection. And the reason as I mentioned last week, the reason for this selection was that it sort of includes quintessential structures of any Guru Yoga practice, so it's very useful. So we're going to do this in the form of a meditation, which will also be our motivation for the session ahead. So prepare our mind just by taking stock where we are in the present moment in our bodies, in this place, right now. And for a few cycles of in and out breaths, let any agitated or jumping thoughts leave with the out breath, dissolving away. Then with the next in-breath, clear, peaceful, radiant mind enters into our body and mind, soothing and relaxing us. So in this way, just stabilize and center ourselves. Now we generate a loving thought, not just an ordinary, limited loving thought concerning just one or two people, I, myself, or maybe a few chosen friends or family members. Let's see if we can expand this loving thought outwards, further and further, embracing all other beings without exception. All other beings are our precious family we wish to protect and to guide towards happiness. So feel that with the mind of compassion also, there's nothing we won't do to benefit these countless others. Now above our crown, we visualize a lotus, a radiant lotus. This is just a few finger widths above the actual surface of our crown. It's shimmering with pure light. In its center is a radiant moon cushion, shimmering with radiant light. And seated upon this is our guru, visualized about the size of a thumb. If we haven't got a particular guru, we visualize Shakyamuni Buddha, the ultimate guru. In any case, the guru that we do visualize, we feel is inseparable from Shakyamuni Buddha. So just spend a few moments consolidating the visualization, bringing it to life, in other words, really feeling that our precious teacher is right here. Then feel that we offer them without any reservation, our body, our speech, and our mind. All the precious things in the universe, all the objects to the senses, we offer in gratitude for the teacher showing us the path to liberation and enlightenment. So now paying homage or tribute to the teacher's perfect enlightened qualities, we think, although free from faults and perfect in all enlightened qualities. Like space, he is devoid of any ultimate intrinsic existence. He appears for all beings, including me, for our benefit. So upon this basis, we now make the heartfelt supplication. O most precious spiritual guide, my teacher, bless me so that the two awakening minds, just as they are found in your heart and in the hearts of those in your lineage, just as found in the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, who are the core expression of the Holy Scriptures, arise in me this very instant. Bless me so that the awakening mind manifests in me throughout all my lives, in all times of prosperity, of misfortune, failure, success, sickness, times of transition, death, and birth. Bless me so that I'll know how to take all adverse conditions and obstacles as factors complementary to my mind training practice. Then imagine that our crown aperture has opened and a perfect replica of the Holy Guru comes down through the central channel and enters the heart, where we have a lotus and a moon seat waiting. In other words, feel that the Holy Teacher becomes inseparable from our most subtle mind. And we spend a few moments meditating directly upon this sheer inseparability, merging into the pure Dharmakaya of the enlightened being. So we imagine that our body, speech, and mind assume the nature of clear light and space, and we rest our mind in that state for as long as possible. So we'll conclude the meditation at this point. So I mentioned last week, this is really a kind of concise Guru Yoga, but it's incredibly profound. And as we study the topic more and more, we'll have an opportunity of discovering the ways in which, in our practices, particularly our tantric practices, when we supplicate the Guru, request the Guru to come down and absorb into our heart, that becomes the very, very special moment that we practice the dissolutions of the gross energies of the body and their accompanying gross consciousnesses, and we move into very, very subtle, deep meditation. And out of that state, if we're doing self-generation practice, we then, after experience having merged with the Dharmakaya of the Guru Buddha, we arise as the seed syllable corresponding to the Bardo state, and then self-generate as the Yidam or deity that we're practicing. And all of this is happening within the sphere of realization of emptiness, that there's no intrinsic existence from its own side. And so on another level, there's nothing stopping us communicating directly with the Buddha's sort of inner subtle nature with our own minds, because there's nothing from the side of our own mind that will prevent it from merging with the Guru's holy mind if we attain sufficient subtlety on our part. In other words, we can be progressive in our evolution, and by absorbing the Guru and feeling that we're one with the Guru, receive the blessings, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche makes so eloquently clear throughout this book. We receive the blessings not just of that one Guru, but all the merit objects, all the Buddhas, all the Bodhisattvas, all the Dharma protectors, all the Sangha, all the supporting teachers and conditions that enable the Dharma to flourish as realizations. All of these are received in that instance. And so a quintessential Guru Yoga practice is unbelievably precious at the time of death, as you could imagine. And so we rehearse this by practicing Guru Yoga as we're going to sleep as well. And there are many, many famous stories of Lama Yeshe, of course, who did very advanced yogic meditations using the subtle mind of sleep. And so people say, oh, Lama's sleeping. And then Rinpoche would say, no, 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 no. Lama is absorbed in the clear light. He's in the most subtle state of meditation possible. And so these other states can be utilized in our practice through becoming more and more familiar with these techniques. So this drawing down of the teacher into our heart can be read on so many different levels, but in another way, it's pointing out there's a sheer connective continuum between our current state, i.e. me, in all my gross, clumsy, historical reality. We do our best, but it's sometimes pretty awkward, isn't it? And the Guru, who's the epitome of all perfected qualities. And you think that's unbreachable, unreachable. That chasm is somehow so vast that we can't begin to think we could tread across it. And so by doing these practices of the Guru here, right here on the crown of our head, and then bringing the Guru right down into our subtle mind, creates a continuum between that enlightened state and our current state. And so the absorption, in this sense, is really referring to the fact that we allow all of our ordinary conceptions and all the things we cling to through our gross desires and our hatred and so forth, the way in which we construct reality, or so-called, according to our ego, has an opportunity to subside. And this radical subsiding of our habitual manic thought processes provides us with an opportunity of seeing more vividly, more clearly, the natural state of our mind. And so it's independence on beginning to realize the actual state of our mind that we can begin to investigate deeper and deeper meditations. So it's really very remarkable. And so all of the sadhanas that we do for our deity practices are really expanded versions of this structure that I just described. Because in a sadhana, we reach a point where we've arisen as the deity, which sounds rather grandiose, but not if we see ourselves as inseparable from the enlightened beings and all of our ordinary appearances having dissolved away. There's no room for the ego to be at play in that scenario anymore. We then manifest it from our own visualized deity body. Radiant lights stream out with countless deities or Buddhas on the ends of the light beams, reaching every sentient being throughout the countless universe. And as it does so, they transform spontaneously into enlightened beings. And so you can see here, this is a completely different dynamic to the way in which we normally consider dealing with reality and also dealing with problems, because we've got another way of working with problems. So I've just sort of said that by way of introduction, because it's really an organic experience, a real experience we're doing here. It's not just in the imagination. So I'm going to quote His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The Dharma is the key to having a meaningful and happy life now and in the future. To practice it seriously, two conditions are necessary. The external condition is relying upon the spiritual qualified mentor. The internal condition is a precious human rebirth with the freedom and fortune to practice the Dharma. The stages of the path, referring to the steps towards enlightenment and liberation, begin with these two essential topics. His Holiness continues, when we're seriously interested in following the path, forming a healthy relationship with a qualified spiritual teacher is essential. If we need teachers for ordinary skills, such as driving or typing, we certainly need them for more complex and delicate tasks, such as transforming our mind into that of a Buddha. Lama Tsongkhapa tells us, quote, thus the excellent teacher is a source of all temporary happiness and highest goodness, beginning with the production of a single good quality and the reduction of a single fault in a student's mind, and eventually encompassing all the knowledge beyond that. His Holiness continues, spiritual teachers play a unique and important role in our lives. Qualified spiritual mentors guide us along the path by giving us teachings, Dharma advice, precepts, oral transmissions, and empowerments. When we experience blocks in our practice, they teach us the antidotes to overcome them. When we have spiritual experiences, they help us determine if these experiences are authentic or deceptive. When our practice is progressing well, our spiritual mentors encourage us to continue. So it's very interesting here, isn't it, to think of, if we leave it up to our ego to decide whether a teaching is genuine, a realization is genuine or fraudulent, we're really not going to be too sure that we can trust the outcome of that decision-making process, because the ego has an investment in making sure that the outer world mirrors its fantasy, its projected fantasy of how the world should be to serve it. Our guru will cut across that in a way that will radically force us to take an independent stance and look at it from other sides, other foci, if you like. We've got scope to begin to work with our ordinary everyday experience in fresh and invigorating ways. I remember once going to see Geshe Doga. I was the centre director at Tara Institute at the time, and I was, as centre directors do, struggling with some quite big administrative issues to do with how you sort of develop a program that's going to mean something for others. And I asked Geshe Doga whether setting up this particular class in a particular way would be of benefit. So I was seeking to get that approval for that single initiative. And I remember this still very clearly. Geshe Doga didn't answer, well, he did, but he didn't answer that particular question. He looked at me with a kind of glare and said, if it's good, you do it. And that was it. Really threw me back, because I realized that, why am I running to my teacher to ask him whether doing something that's clearly good is good? Do it. You don't need to ask me. Lama Yeshe constantly threw things back onto his students in this manner. They'll say, should I do this or go to Morocco or go to sort of Algeria? And Lama Yeshe would say, you think about it, dear. You think, not me tell you, you do the work. So of course the guru's watching, and if there's a need to intercede, to step in and somehow rescue you from a really silly idea, the guru will do that. But that's not what Geshe Doga did to me on this occasion, because he didn't want me to be suffocating my own quite healthy initiatives. I had to believe in myself. I was a centre director. I'd have to go getting approval for every movement I made. How was I going to carry that role out if I had such little confidence in my own capacity? So you can see here that guru devotion doesn't involve forfeiting our sense of self-worth and our own personal direction. So His Holiness mentions that the Sanskrit name for the guru is guru, of course. It means heavy with good qualities and superior in good qualities. And he mentions these terms do not have the connotation of someone being a living Buddha, for not all gurus are awakened. So this point is very, very important because it resonates with Lama Zopa Rinpoche's frequent observation in this book, that we're to see the guru as a Buddha, irrespective of whether or not the guru is enlightened. Very, very interesting and very, very challenging. So to quote Rinpoche on page 12, while we are training our mind in the meditations of the steps of the path to enlightenment, we need to make strong single-pointed requests to the guru out of guru devotion. Single-pointedly praying with guru devotion causes us to receive the blessings of the guru. Making single-pointed requests to the guru means transforming our ordinary impure mind, which sees the guru, which sees faults in the guru, into the pure mind of guru devotion, which sees the guru as a Buddha, whether or not he actually is an enlightened being. Full stop. So the point here is that we're to understand from our own side, from our own stance, the value and the importance of seeing the guru as a Buddha. If we misinterpret this point by over-applying it, we'll run into all kinds of difficulties. So the subtlety revolves around the manner in which we are, from our own side, required to see the guru as a Buddha, irrespective of whether or not the guru is a Buddha. In other words, the emphasis is on our cognitive stance. And this is not hard to sort of understand if we consider for a moment the way in which visualization practices occurs in tantric meditation. So in highest yoga tantra, for example, we're required to overcome ordinary appearances by replacing them with divine appearances. So His Holiness says that with customary droll humour, otherwise the idea of doing a self-generation of the deity would be rather strange. In other words, we're going to be arising as a deity as a kind of grotesque pantomime manifestation of the ego, and proceed on that basis. We've kind of created a new realm of fantastical operations for the impure, ordinary ego mind with all of its delusory cravings. And this is because we have an impure view of the guru. So His Holiness is relating this to the deity self-generation. If we have an impure view of the guru, and we've absorbed the guru and arisen out of the Dharmakaya state as the deity ourselves, then we're going to see that in a kind of mixed and problematic way. So I'll quote His Holiness. He says, when we have trained in the fundamental path and the perfection vehicle practices and are sufficiently mature in the Dharma, we may request empowerment into practices of various tantric meditational deities. Students imagine the guru giving them the empowerment to be the meditational deity and the environment to be the deity's abode or mandala. When doing tantric practice following empowerment, we imagine ourselves and all sentient beings as Buddhas, not just ourselves, all sentient beings as Buddhas. And the environment is a pure land. In this case, not seeing your tantric master as a Buddha would be strange. Only in tantric practice is it essential to regard the tantric master as a Buddha. This view, His Holiness says, should not be taught to beginners who are not mature in the Dharma, because it is open to misinterpretation and confusion. So I'm just going to quote a little story here, a little extract from a commentary or a kind of reminiscence, really, that Alex Berzin has given on his relationship acting as Tshogkong Rinpoche's attendant and interpreter on one of his tours. I've been traveling with Tshogkong Rinpoche as his interpreter and secretary on a Second World tour, and had just returned from a side trip to Caracas, Venezuela. Upon Rinpoche's encouragement, I had accepted an invitation to teach to a newly formed Buddhist group there, my first such engagement. Rinpoche had stayed at Geshe Wangel's monastery in New Jersey to rest for a few days. Geshe Wangel, a Kunk monk from Russia, was the first master of the Tibetan tradition whom I had met back in 1967. Upon my return, Rinpoche asked no questions about how I had done. This was his usual style, and it did not surprise me. A week later, however, in London, sitting around the kitchen table after dinner, Rinpoche said, quote, "In the future, when you become a well-known teacher and your students see you as a Buddha, and you know full well that you are not enlightened, do not let this shake your belief that all your teachers are Buddhas." This was all he said, Berzin concludes. And then we both remained silent. It would take me many years to understand the profundity of his words. So a very beautiful story, I think you'll agree, but also a very, very wise one. So this is what I meant by cognitive stance. We know ourselves how clumsy and awkward we might be. We're not enlightened. I'm talking myself here. But if we're looking at our teacher as someone who's clumsy and unenlightened, we're misunderstanding the way in which the guru can operate as the crystalline essence or the kind of path to receiving all the blessings of the merit field, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche constantly explains. Rinpoche says there is no more powerful object than the guru for generating merit and purifying negative karma. So in the second chapter of this book, Rinpoche talks about the power of the guru in terms not so much of the power of the guru in and of themselves, but the very fact that we have entered into this relationship with the guru from our heart creates a powerful karmic catalyst for transformation that is unimaginably vast, unimaginably powerful. So Rinpoche says this is the case even if that guru is not an enlightened being. So this is really, really an important point. So having said that, though, His Holiness recommends we adopt an evolutionary approach, a kind of systematic developmental approach to this topic. And just so that you can refer to it in your own time, this is volume 2, I think. Volume 2 of this very, very precious series of books by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron, Venerable Thupten Chodron. And it's really a lam-rim presentation, a vast lam-rim, but it's been inflected very, very deliberately by His Holiness to reflect the needs that non-traditional Buddhists might have as they approach the classical Buddhist traditions and all of the concepts involved. And so, in other words, it's very generous in its understanding of the kinds of quandaries and dilemmas that we might face as we approach some of these classical ideas of guru devotion in Buddhism. And it provides us with a way of stepping through. So His Holiness says, if we said that all gurus are Buddhas, there would be some gurus who became Buddhas without working very hard on the path. It's another example of His Holiness's humour, isn't it? They haven't done anything from their side, but because we see them as a Buddha, they're a Buddha. It's easy, nothing more to be done. That creates a kind of comical situation, a difficult situation. Mistakenly thinking that all teachers are Buddhas and later discovering that a certain person lacks all the qualities of an enlightened being not only leaves us disappointed, but also puts the Lama into a difficult position. The only thing the Lama can do then is just shake their head because they lack all the Buddha's qualities. Therefore, it makes more sense to follow the real connotation of the terms Lama and Guru, because genuine spiritual teachers have superior qualities in comparison to their followers. So this is also something that Rinpoche discusses in chapter 3, where he talks about the necessary qualities of the guru. The guru does have to have essential qualities, special qualities, and one of them, of course, is that they know more about the Holy Dharma than we do. They also have to have an ethical foundation and love and compassion and so forth, and not to be biased, not to be driven by the delusion. There's other criteria, but that's a basic one. So His Holiness says, I recommend going about the stages of practice in a gradual way and first form a relationship with a fundamental vehicle teacher, learn the Four Truths, and take refuge and some level of pratamoksha precepts. Later, as your practice progresses, seek out a spiritual mentor from who can teach you the bodhisattva path. And on that basis, practice the 6 perfections and undertake the bodhisattva ethical restraints. After some time, when you are properly prepared, seek a qualified tantric master, receive empowerment into that practice, and meditate on guru deity yoga. Shakpa Sokdruk Rangdrol, the great Tibetan yogi who did extensive retreat and was a prolific writer, speaks of these three kinds of teachers. This is still His Holiness's commentary. Quote, "From the teacher who showed the path of deliverance, I received the sacred teachings of individual liberation. My practice was to shun wrongdoing and cultivate virtue. From the Bodhisattva teacher, I received the special sacred Mahayana teachings on generating bodhicitta. My practice was then to cherish others more than myself. From the Vajradhara teacher, I received the sacred teachings, empowerments and instructions on the secret mantrayana. My practice was to meditate upon the generation and completion states and Dzogchen." So His Holiness concludes, thus we are being asked to fully understand that these three types of practice have three types of teachers. The teacher of the fundamental vehicle instructs us in the four truths, gives us refuge and lay and monastic vows, and teaches us Vinaya, ethical conduct. As such, he acts as a representative of the Buddha. We see our teacher as a teacher or as a preceptor and relate to him or her on a human level. We regard them as a wise elder, a sincere practitioner from whom we can learn. In the perfection vehicle, we are being asked to see the perfection vehicle teacher as an emanation of a Buddha or a high bodhisattva. So His Holiness says, perfection vehicle texts speak of Buddhas and bodhisattvas emanating in many forms to benefit others. Since our perfection vehicle teacher leads us on the bodhisattva path and gives us the ethical bodhisattva restraints, we view that person as an emanation of the Buddha or a high bodhisattva. Here, the teacher is seen as equal to or like a Buddha, in the sense that the karma accumulated in relation to our teacher is similar to that accumulated in relation to the Buddha. By making offerings to or harming our perfection vehicle teacher, we accumulate karma equal to acting in a similar way towards the Buddha himself. So this is again a point that Rinpoche repeatedly makes. And so he says that this relationship with the perfection vehicle teacher is not only a conveyance of knowledge, but a character building. The teacher is responsible for guiding spiritually students over time so that they become ethical, kind, and wise human beings with a correct understanding of the Buddha's teachings and the ability to meditate upon them. So only in tantric practice, says His Holiness, is it essential to regard the tantric master as a Buddha. This view, as I quoted this before, this view should not be taught to beginners who are not mature in the Dharma because it is open to misinterpretation and confusion. So, of course, these three kinds of gurus can seem to happen all at the same time or in the same place. So, you know, experientially, these can be very, very challenging situations, of course. We might meet the teachers in this order and so forth. But to know that there are these three aspects of the guru and three corresponding sets of practices really helps us work out how to proceed. And so I think we'd have to say that Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary in The Heart of the Path is totally imbued with these three types of guru being absorbed into one. In other words, Rinpoche is assuming that tantric perspective. And I think it's very useful to know that. But also, many of the passages in the book will also be referring to the task of emulating the guru in order to accomplish our own bodhisattva momentum in our practice. And so this is closer to what His Holiness was referring to as this need to emulate, see the Buddha of our guru as like a Buddha, this level of simile, if you like a Buddha. We respond to them as though they were a Buddha because they're functioning like a Buddha for us, they're guiding us. And Rinpoche will say many times in here that it's only the guru's kindness that is ripening for us to see. It's the guru's manifestation that is the one we can touch and reach. Therefore, the guru is the kindest of all, because he's the one, or she is the one tangible object that we can actually reach from our current limited perspective. And so as we go into this more and more, we see there are more and more wonderful dimensions. So His Holiness is well aware of the cultural issues. He says, although we are the ones who choose our spiritual mentors, there are certain conditions under which someone becomes one of our teachers, for example, if they give us refuge or the 5 precepts, monastic ordination, bodhisattva ethical restraints, or tantric initiation. For this reason, it is necessary to check the person's qualifications before attending these ceremonies, and do not rush blindly into things. His Holiness continues, Buddhism is spreading to countries where it has not existed before, and there it encounters different cultural values and ways of doing things. The model of the spiritual mentor-disciple relationship that has existed for centuries in Asia does not easily transplant into our secular modern society. Traditional spiritual mentors and contemporary students raised in secular societies both enter into a student-teacher relationship with expectations that they may not be aware of. So His Holiness indicates that this possible naivety mightn't just extend to Western students, but to Tibetan teachers as well. His Holiness can say that, of course, with great knowledge. He's qualified to do so. When Tibetans go to other countries, people in the Dharma centers do not necessarily know what kind of teacher is coming, and out of respect, they treat everyone as though they were a highly esteemed Lama. This can create misunderstandings. So again, we have to be real here. His Holiness has given examples sometimes during his discourses in India of the problems that do arise. And for example, sometimes a teacher will go to a particular country in Asia in order to raise funds for a project, a personal project, or a project of the monastery for which they're representing. And His Holiness suggests that sometimes the kind of logic behind these requests are implying, or might even use the word insinuating on the part of the Lama, that they have high realizations and therefore it's appropriate to give. And so His Holiness would be the first to point out that this kind of calling upon one's spiritual prowess as a qualification to become a suitable object of you giving is a misuse of the Dharma. It's an abuse of the Dharma, in other words. And so we have to be careful and wise. And so His Holiness has said, in relation to those unfortunate situations, sometimes where a Lama will take sexual advantage of a student, that these situations should be publicly discussed and publicized. Call it out, he requests. It's absolutely crucial that this isn't somehow smuggled and suffocated under the carpet and tried to make it go away, because it doesn't coincide with the idealistic scenario of perfectly enlightened gurus. So I raise these points through the words of His Holiness, because they're very, very complex issues, of course. So His Holiness says, in the context of the Dharma, disciples and students are expected to investigate a prospective teacher's qualities before taking him or her as one of their spiritual mentors, because a mentor-disciple relationship is expected to be lifelong. This is not the case when studying with a teacher at school. In addition, Dharma teachers traditionally do not charge for teachings, and students do not pay for their teachers. They support them by making offerings and volunteering their services. Here, the motivation is one of gratitude, and the offering is given to create merit. It is not payment due, as in a business relationship. As part of their spiritual development, Dharma students are taught to appreciate and respect their teachers. This helps to reduce the students' arrogance and increases their receptivity to learning the Dharma. There is a natural hierarchy in the spiritual mentor-disciple relationship that is useful for subduing students' self-centered attitude. Students do not seek equal access status with their teachers. So His Holiness is asking us here to have appropriate expectations. His Holiness says, although we may have emotional needs, the role of Dharma teachers is not to fulfill these. He says, complications arise if we have a conscious or unconscious expectation that our spiritual teachers will meet our emotional needs, be our psychotherapist, tell us whom to marry, or choose our career. The role of the spiritual mentor is to guide us in learning the Dharma, critically reflect on its meaning, and correctly meditate upon it. This is why it is so important to be under their guidance. However, spiritual mentors do not do the work of gaining realizations for us. We must practice the Dharma ourselves. So this is an example of that aspect of my talk where I'm talking about weaving in some different threads, because I'm going to now weave in a few observations by Rob Priest. And I did mention last week his book, The Wisdom of Imperfection. And again, to preface Rob Priest, he's eminently qualified because he is a lifelong student of Lama Yeshe and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he pays tribute frequently to Lama Yeshe's advice and care for him in this book. So Rob Priest is at no point trying to repudiate the precious transformative power of the student-guru relationship. However, he says, quote, in a therapeutic setting, he's a trained Jungian analyst, by the way, many, many years experience, so he's speaking from experience. In the therapeutic setting, I encounter Buddhist practitioners whose view of the path seems driven by an intense longing to be a better person. This striving is based on a fundamental lack of self-acceptance. their spiritual urgency is often born out of a desire to be a good and caring person, sensitive and wise, as this will lead to a sense of self-affirmation. But scratch the surface of this spiritual correctedness, and we'll discover deep insecurities, lack of self-worth, and lack of self-acceptance. The resulting need for love and acceptance is what the psychotherapy world calls narcissistic wounding, and can make spirituality self-preoccupied. We may attempt to cover this wounding with a veneer of spiritual goodness, but this does not heal the root. It will often feel inauthentic. So this is a really, really valuable commentary here, because we can fool ourselves that we're somehow a more advanced spiritual practitioner than we actually are. And we can also fool ourselves that we have a more profound guru-student relationship, especially me, because I'm a special student and I've worked on it for many years. And therefore, a certain conceit can set in that can be very, very psychologically damaging, if not dangerous. And so it becomes a form of hubris. It becomes an hallucinatory blockage that prevents us from transforming and even receiving advice clearly and comprehending it, because we're having to filter everything through this sort of ego need that's desperate. And so on a couple of occasions in the centres, I've been stung, shall we say, by a cruel remark from a Dharma student. And I think to myself, where's that come from? How can that be? Aren't you practicing Dharma? And so you realize that under the surface, there's a struggling person, a wounded person, desperately trying to be a good person. Fantastic. Wonderful if you want to be a good person. But if that's somehow mapped onto a spiritual conceit of progress, that I'm somehow a well-developed student, it can become a very, very twisted and pointed weapon to wield, especially against fellow Dharma practitioners. So you can see here that we have to be very, very careful to extract our personal egotistical needs from our perception of the guru as an enlightened being. And if we don't do that sufficiently, we run certain risks of miscoloring and distorting that relationship so that it won't work in the right way. So Priest recalls a young Western Tibetan Buddhist nun living within a community I was a part of. Priest is talking. She tried hard to live a pure, selfless existence that she saw exemplified in the teachings. She seldom, if ever, considered her own needs. She would sleep very little and constantly work to take care of others. Many of us would say, look at her, she's a bodhisattva, such a bodhisattva. Sadly, it was evident that beneath this utter dedication to serve her teachers and work tirelessly for others was a desperately sad and unhappy person. She would seldom acknowledge this, because to do so would be to think of herself. Suppressing her own inner need or pain was crucial to her. So Priest continues, in time, however, she became sick and her inner struggle started to break through the veneer of her idealized bodhisattva persona. Fortunately, she was taken in hand by a very kind visiting old lady who could see straight through her mask. Letting go of the imperative to negate herself in order to feel acceptable would not be easy. She did eventually do so, and let go of something of the fanatical ideal if she had set for herself to live by. Her example stood out for me as one of how the ideal of a bodhisattva's total selflessness must be born out of a healthy sense of self-respect and self-love, if it is not simply to become part of our pathology. So these are pretty strong words, aren't they? So the idealism, says priest, that leads to a desire or an addiction to perfection on the spiritual path can be psychologically very damaging. The Buddhist path recognizes that it is folly to search for perfection in life. All this searching does is lead to endless suffering and dissatisfaction. The only road to perfection is for the ego to finally give up this search and allow what is, recognizing that our innate Buddha nature is beyond the relative qualities of good and bad. To become enlightened is not about perfecting our relative state of being, but is about recognizing our true nature. So this returns us to the basic proposition that we must skillfully balance a healthy sense of self-worth while we strive on the spiritual path, which is unbelievably extensive in its scope. Are there any questions at this point? Because I'm throwing some challenging ideas up. Has anyone got any comments I'd like to make? Any thoughts?
Dr. Ross, please may I first of all ask about the book?
Which one? Sorry,
you held up a book before that. Is it the one that I'm just putting in the chat there? Is that it?
I don't have it here. I haven't added the priest one yet. And I haven't added this yet. This is the foundation of all practice. I put the priest
in the
volume 2.
Of all practice?
Yeah, foundation of Buddhist practice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Dr. Ross, why were you saying specifically volume 2?
Because it's a set, it's up to, I think, volume 7 now. And so the particular topic, there's 2 chapters on guru devotion in here, which I'm referring to. So from our perspective, it's that volume that's very, very useful. Although it comes at the beginning of the lam-rim presentation, in this series of books, it's coming a little bit later for the reasons that His Holiness is explaining, that he feels there needs to be a bit more context in our understanding before we begin to really broach these topics.
And there's one more thing. We have 3 people, possibly in Korea, I'm not sure. And would you be good enough to test and see if you're able to talk, please?
Are you able to turn your microphones on? Maybe not at the moment.
Okay. Okay, that should work now. Please try again. No, okay.
Now I'm going to throw a kind of a curved ball now, because I'm going to push this point a little bit further, and by quoting from a article that was published in Tricycle magazine, Winter 17, called Why I Quit Guru Yoga by Stephen Batchelor. And many of us will know Stephen Batchelor because of his very fine and beautiful translation of A Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So Batchelor says, before I knew about the centrality of Guru Yoga in the Tibetan tradition, my ability to practice it in a heartfelt way made me feel fraudulent, burdened by negative karma, and effectively barred from making much progress in this life. I recognized that my resistance to this practice stemmed from an upbringing in a secular democratic culture that privileged independence of mind, reason, and personal responsibility. I also recalled the injunction of the Buddha, often cited by Tibetan Lamas, to, quote, examine my teachings as carefully as a goldsmith would assay gold, and not accept them just out of faith in me, which had inspired me to pursue my training and in philosophy and dialectics with Geshe Rabten. I had likewise memorized the Tibetan text of the Four Alliances, a pithy 4-line verse from the sutras about what to rely upon in one's practice. The first line says, rely on the person, rely not on the person, rely on the teaching. Eventually, these tensions inside me reached a point where something snapped. I clearly recall the moment when I was rapidly chanting the various tantric sadhanas and mantras I was obliged to recite daily, and it struck me with irrefutable force. This is ridiculous. At that moment, I stopped. I never again spent an hour or more of my day intoning my commitments. I was relieved to have recovered my own authority for living my life. I realized that I had been intimidated by a culture of fear. I no longer needed to seek my teacher's permission for what I could and couldn't do with my mind. But this means that if I have to go to a Vajra hell, so be it. So Batchelor is arguing here that his resistance to this practice of guru devotion is based on an upbringing in a secular democratic society that privileged independence of mind, reason, and personal responsibility. But I wonder if he's not overstating the case via a construction of the East as a realm where qualities such as privileged independence of mind, reason, and personal responsibility don't function. Aren't these qualities those that His Holiness constantly emphasizes are crucial to the Lander tradition? While it's clear in his essay that Batchelor vigorously seeks to capture how he felt driven to distance himself culturally from the Tibetan tradition due to what he perceives as a entrenched governmental feudalism, the word feudalism is his, that is antagonistic, if not entirely anathema to Western democratic models with its emphasis on individuality and self-determination. For example, regarding the history of Buddhism in India, Batchelor writes, over time it adopted increasingly monarchic and feudal forms of organization, particularly as Mahayana and Vajrayana forms of the Dharma became more widespread. So Batchelor takes the problem he has with the guru as the linchpin for bringing a cascading collapse of his entire commitment to his Buddhist teachers. And I think that's, I'm not speaking for Batchelor or judging him, I'm just saying this is what he's described happened. And I think that's entirely unnecessary. We don't need to approach the matter in that extreme form at all if we follow His Holiness's developmental, careful presentation that I've described earlier in the session. So in preparing my notes for the talk, I was conscious of an alternative account by a Western student of his relationship with Serkong Sencha Rinpoche, namely Alex Berzin. Alex Berzin was a contemporary of Stephen Batchelor's and Alan Wallace, for that matter, in the early days in Dharamsala. Many teachings from Geshe Nawandagi, Geshe Rabton, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and so forth. And so Berzin describes Sensab Serkong Rinpoche as not only one of his main teachers, but as one of the main teachers of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. So he says, Serkong Senchab Rinpoche, who lived in Dharamsala and was one of His Holiness's, the Dalai Lama's personal gurus, who gave His Holiness commentary on Atisha's Lamp of the Path to Enlightenment and some other teachings as well, is also one of my gurus, and has been exceptionally kind to me. Even though from my side I have been lazy and lacking in ability, from Rinpoche's side, he would always teach me everything, anything I asked for. He always looked after me, guided me, and was really so very kind. Serkong Semshab Rinpoche's father was the Serkong Dorje Chung, who lived in Tibet, the one who, after becoming a Lorumpa Geshe, attained the highest levels of Tantra and practiced with a motherly consort. Serkong Senchab Rinpoche was his son, and later, when Serkong Dorje Chung was reborn, Serkong Senchab Rinpoche became his teacher, the teacher of his father's incarnation. Serkong Dorje Chung also told the Serje monk, that Serkong Senchab Rinpoche was Marpa's son, Tama Dode, and another incarnate Lama. Senchog Ling Rinpoche was Milarepa. So Serkong Dorje Chung said, in reality, we are like this. So that description of the relationship of Serkong Senchab Rinpoche to his father was given by Lama Zopa Rinpoche in The Heart of the Path, because they were both personal teachers of Lama Zopa Rinpoche as well. So Berzin pays homage. He says his heart, his down-to-earth manner, practical approach, and great sense of humour endeared him to both Tibetan and Western students alike. A master of all traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, he combined the highest qualities of being a learned scholar, an accomplished practitioner, and a skillful, compassionate teacher. So I'm going to read an account here because I saw these sessions as sort of dark fireside chats rather than me sort of giving a lecture as such. And so to tell some moving stories, I think is very, very apropos. So Berzin describes the scene around the passing away at the age of 69 of Serkong Rinpoche, who, he says, deliberately took on life obstacles to His Holiness the Dalai Lama by his incredibly advanced practice of Tonlen. I'm going to now give his account. Whenever Rinpoche taught this practice, he said that we need to be willing to take on the sufferings of others, even if it meant to the point of sacrificing our lives. He always referred to the example of Kunu Lama Rinpoche, who had said of a person in his home district that they took on the injury of someone else who had received a head injury and consequently passed away. When I asked Rinpoche if he was able to do this, to take on other people's suffering in this manner, Rinpoche would reply, no. It would be like an astronaut, he explained, who sacrificed his life for the sake of world progress, Just as the example and fame of the heroic astronaut would assure a substantial government pension for his family, so too the heroic example of the Lama sacrifice will provide nourishment of his disciples left behind. Tsongkhapa Rinpoche remained in the death juncture meditation on clear light for 3 days. Those with the ability to direct their rebirths normally enter this meditation as part of the process of either generating or continuing a line of reincarnate lamas. During the meditation, their hearts remain warm and their bodies do not start decomposing, although they have stopped breathing. Normally, the great lamas remain in this state for several days, after which their bodies head slump and blood leaves the nostrils, indicating that their consciousness has left the bodies. When these signs occurred with Tsongkhapa Rinpoche, rainbows glimmered in the sky and wondrous lights appeared on the barren hills chosen for his cremation. Although people sent word to His Holiness's Namgyal monastery in Dharamsala for monks to come for the cremation ceremony, the party could not arrive in time. The Spiti monks performed the rites modestly, as Rinpoche would have wished. Shortly afterwards, a fresh water spring with healing powers sprouted from the cremation site. Still flowing today, it has become a place of pilgrimage. Exactly 9 months later, on May 29, 1984, Rinpoche took birth again once more in Spiti in a humble family. So Berzin, they're talking about the same teacher here. It's interesting, isn't it? Berzin, unlike Batchelor, is unfazed or unhindered by the issues of Tibetan traditional culture. Indeed, he has taken carefully calibrated personal steps to safeguard the young Rinpoche's upbringing so that he might enjoy growing up in traditional ways as befitting an incarnate Lama. So Berzin says, so far I've taken a back seat in Tsongkhapa Rinpoche's upbringing. This is the young incarnate Lama. I have felt that the old Rinpoche would have wished mainly to serve his own people. If the Tibetan form of Buddhism is to survive in its fullest form, training future generations of Tibetans is essential. This is because at present, the complete Buddhist teachings are available only in the Tibetan language. Rinpoche provided me the best circumstances imaginable for my training and self-development. To repay his kindness, I've sought to do the same. So these are radically divergent accounts to first contact with a highly regarded Tibetan Vajra guru. And the fact that there can be such divergence, I think, points very clearly to the importance of taking responsibility to assess in our own mature way the nature and quality of our own particular psychological stance, together with our predispositions arriving as they do from previous lifetimes. So part of this project is understanding and taking responsibility for our own personal pre-existing psychological wounds, the shape of our neuroses, as it were. We must pay attention and focus compassionate care upon our own psychological insecurities, as Priest has so carefully explained. If we fail to do this, our ability to judge the other, whether this be a guru or a non-guru, is prone to become confusing, distorted, and impaired. How true is that? If we can't judge another person clearly and fairly because of the extent of our own muddled inner neurotic business, how on earth are we going to hope to have a clear and valid assessment of the teacher who's going to show us the path to enlightenment. So they're not incompatible goals. To take responsibility for oneself and to develop a heartfelt commitment to the teacher can be seen to be part of the same momentum, but it does have these two components. So sometimes I mention being involved in the Buddhist centers. Sometimes I meet Buddhists who have not dealt with certain problems, such as a destructively ended relationship, for example. And they've walked away and beyond it with forthright steps because of their being uplifted by the Dharma. But if you look at it from an ordinary perspective, they've left a partner behind in incredible travail without attempting to pick up any of those pieces. So they haven't done any of that psychological responsible work that I'm talking about. And they're actually using their spiritual fervor as a means of going beyond having to deal with it at all. So in other words, our spiritual practice can result in a kind of fossilized, thwarted self-development at the level of a wounded ego in a way that will not only prevent us from gaining fulfillment in immediate terms, but will produce many, many obstacles to our practice of Dharma. So priest says, one thing that my teacher, Lama Yeshe, would always emphasize was that the capacity to trust in ourselves and discern truth from self-delusion was crucial. He also knew that this would not grow from his constantly solving our problems for us and telling us what to do. In this respect, he was like a loving parent who allowed his children to find their own way in life, knowing that sometimes they would make dreadful mistakes. He was able to empower his disciples with a real sense of his own inner wisdom, of their own inner wisdom. This led to a relationship that did not go through the same degree of disillusionment, perhaps because there was less illusion in the first place. So Priest is referring to disillusionment in a particular way because he's saying that if we have this faulty mode of approaching the guru based on a kind of grandiose extrapolation of our splendid individual ego, as I've been describing, at some point when things don't work, the whole thing comes crashing down. The edifice collapses. All the seams that have been sort of covered over rather superficially break open, and the very structure of our belief and our faith falls apart. If we come in on a more practical basis, a more realistic basis, we have the opportunity of developing a relationship that's very tender, very intimate, very open, very honest, very self-responsible, and very real. And on that basis, the teacher, the guru in this case, is able to impart advice and wisdom to that student, knowing that they can pick it up and run with it in really productive and exciting ways. So I'll give an example here. Sometimes students get over enthusiastic and they say, oh, look, I'm ready for a 3-year retreat. I'm fully renounced now. I understand I need to be serious about my spiritual practice. And Geshe Doga has said sometimes in these situations, maybe not much point yet. Don't go away for 3 years and lock yourself in a cave, because you're going to come out of that cave with the same little cluster of problems that you went in with, and you'll have wasted 3 years of your precious human rebirth, basically. And so Lama Zopa is constantly advising us, isn't he, to throw ourselves into the foray of life as bodhisattva trainees, and to use opportunities of encountering the enemy, inverted commas, and so forth, see them as our guru, as our teacher, and see if we can transform ourselves. But this involves a direct dynamic with the problem at this level. It's not denying it at all. It's working with it and through it. And there's no more extraordinary way of doing that than through the Tonlen practices. So I might throw it open for any comments here. We've only got a few minutes left in the session. I've made a series of propositions today, and they're not necessarily ones that you'll often hear made, because they sometimes, in the bid of being very spiritual, students don't like to talk about the fact that there may be problems related to our relationships with the teachers from our side. So I've sought to be direct. Hi, Doris. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
If somebody else is about to speak, go ahead. Go ahead.
Doris was going to, I think. Yeah. Oh, you got your microphone off, Doris.
Sorry, I wasn't sure who was going.
There we are.
Yeah.
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Just a comment. It's weird how things happen, all in one day. Like Stephen Batchelor came up 3 times today.
Oh, really?
And I'm reminded that, like that article in 2017, I probably came onto it much later, but I could have been lured down his path very easily, because I wanted to resist the whole guru thing, and he became disenchanted with reincarnation or rebirth, and I'm just so grateful that I ignored my scientific brain and wanting to be lured to the secular and wanting to shove away anything religious. I don't know, that was just my comment. It's just like weird that he came up 3 times today.
So I think he epitomizes, as you mentioned, a scientific rationalist impulse in our culture, which is to shear away any presumed vestige of mysticism or fanciful or magical thinking, and only to consolidate on the basis of what we can realistically and scientifically discover and ground. And I was a few months ago at Tara Institute, we have a library, a bookshop there. I'm sure many of the centres do. And someone, the bookshop coordinator came up to me and said, should we have Stephen Batchelor's books in our bookshop? And I said, yes, of course we should. And she said, well, isn't it really difficult? He doesn't believe in reincarnation now. He doesn't believe in karma. He doesn't believe that the Buddha was enlightened and so forth. Isn't it sort of kind of dangerous to have that there? And I said, well, look, the alternative is to practice censorship, book burning, and pretend he doesn't exist. I would much rather we open ourselves to these sorts of questions and read his books to find out what we think. And I personally think there are aspects to Batchelor's project which are quite worthy, because what he's attempting to do is to import an ethical practice structure into daily life without any mystical trappings, in the expectation that may be of some value to people living in Western culture. So that's his aim. I don't agree with how he's arrived at that position and what he's jettisoned on the way, but nonetheless, it's an interesting project, and it's good to acknowledge that it does exist.
I think that, like, he's stripping away like the essence of Buddhism to make it palatable or manageable. I don't even know what the right word is there, to a scientific hard. I don't know. I'm just, I've been a scientist all my life until this, but I still consider myself a scientist, but it's Buddhist science.
So do you find an sort of inherent incompatibility between a Western scientific mode and a Buddhist investigative mode?
I don't know anymore, because all I had to do was explore continuity of consciousness, and I was on board.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Doris's point's very important, and it was a point that I was going to make last week, but I didn't get around to it, which was that in order to really approach guru devotion as a topic, in leading to some sort of commitment and practice, we need to take a whole lot of other things on board already. One of which is continuity of consciousness, the reality of rebirth, the reality of karma, the meaning of suffering, particularly pervasive suffering, the meaning of renunciation or definite emergence, the nature of the bodhisattva vehicle, the possibility of becoming liberated, becoming enlightened, the nature of Buddha nature, the fact that we all have the same potential without any question, the role of the afflictions, the way in which we don't see reality in a realistic manner due to the projections of inherent existence, which obscures us from seeing the way things actually are. All of these ingredients work together to create a kind of a cosmological view, a cosmology, which is also a perfect mapping of our psychological potential. And I feel that this is what Buddhism is doing. And so it's extending our concepts and our language in all sorts of remarkable ways, many of which aren't given to us. Speaking here as someone living in a sort of Australia, colonial Australia. And so they're very, very precious. And I noticed that in all of these books, for example, the word dukkha is used constantly. And Venerable Thupten Chodron explains in her introduction, she doesn't want to translate that as suffering or dissatisfaction, because it doesn't capture the essence of what's meant by that term and what it means in the context of the Four Noble Truths. And so language is incredibly limiting in itself, and the concepts that we can carry in language. And so I tend to feel the need to open out to all of these things to examine, rather than try to plot a very cautious and kind of fragile pathway. So
Dr. Moore, I appreciate you bringing up the bachelor. I didn't know about him, and I agree with you. It's better to open it up than to, quote, burn his book.
yes,
You know? I don't like that concept because it creates closed circles that don't. You can't join our circle. You are excluded because you don't believe X, Y, Z. I would rather open it up and critically examine it as you did. And thank you for doing that. Appreciate it.
Well, what about Kelsang Gyatso? I have a teacher who won't. He doesn't read. He doesn't have his books. He threw them away. He says he's been told not to. I still look at them sometimes. Not the Dorje ones, but some of his other ones. He's a very good writer. Was. It's controversial.
Yes, Dani, of those who may not have the background, I was referring to Geshe Kelsang Gyatso, who has remained a practitioner of the Shugten spirit, as Rinpoche describes it. And a part of that is repudiating His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a living Buddha. So when we had His Holiness taught here in Australia a few years ago, the students of Geshe Kelsang were outside the meeting arena. Many thousands of people attended and were shouting, "The Dalai Lama is a liar, the Dalai Lama is a liar, the Dalai Lama is a liar," over and over again. And this chant wafted over the teachings as a kind of mantra. And it was very, very confronting for every student having to sort of enter the building through these. This question came up once in relation to a student asking Lama Zopa Rinpoche. They had been a student of Geshe Kelsang, a close student, and he said not to burn the books because they're holy Dharma, but to just put them in a place which is sort of discreet and don't refer to them again. just sort of let them be there. We don't need to
That's
destroy
funny.
them.
That's
So I thought that was a
funny.
very
I still have
tactical
them.
solution, really.
Cool.
And the same thing can happen on the web, by the way. When you do a web browse, you sometimes end up on some rather tricky sites. So you'd have to be aware of these things. Yeah. So maybe we can finish. But did you have a question, darling?
Yeah.
I was going to do a longer meditation at the end of the session, but we don't really have time. So I might start with a longer meditation next week. But just to feel again, as we did at the beginning of the session, that the Guru, inseparable from the Buddha, is seated at the heart. And we make a supplication, and we'll recognize this supplication from Lama Zopa. You are my Guru, you are my deities, you are the dakinis and Dharma protectors. From this moment until enlightenment, I need seek no refuge other than you. In this life, the bardo, and all future lives, hold me with your hook of compassion. Free me from samsara and nirvana's fears. Grant all attainments. Be my unfailing friend and guard me from interferences. You are my Guru, you are my deities, you are the dakinis and Dharma protectors. From this moment until enlightenment, I need seek no refuge other than you. In this life, the bardo, and all future lives, hold me with your hook of compassion. Free me from samsara and nirvana's fears. Grant all attainments. Be my unfailing friend and guard me from interferences. You are my Guru, you are my deities, you are the dakinis and Dharma protectors. From this moment until enlightenment, I need seek no refuge other than you. In this life, the bardo, and all future lives, hold me with your hook of compassion. Free me from samsara and nirvana's fears. Grant all attainments. Be my unfailing friend and guard me from interferences. May I quickly become Guru Lord Buddha and lead each and every sentient being into his enlightened realm because of these merits. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish but increase more and more. May my venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, and the torch of Losang's teachings always remain, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. So thanks very much. Next week, I'm not able to attend. I've already contacted the Venerable Losang Dondrup about this, but he said it can be pre-recorded, but I haven't had any arrangements given to me about how that might happen. But that's the 19th, yeah. And so I think it might have to remain posted there. Paola, do you know what the...
I don't know what the arrangement is. I'll check with Venerable, and let's assume there's going to be something on the page. So always check.
All right. Yes, we'll do that.
Website. Yeah. There's going to be something there. And Dr. Ross, I'm sorry, can I assume then that there is going to be a class the week after? And
absolutely.
We will have our 4 sessions complete.
Yes, I'm going to make sure we have our 4 sessions, yes. It's just that next week is difficult. And do keep reading. I'm sort of covering material sort of here and there, but we can look at the qualities of the Guru, which is chapter 4, and the qualities of the disciple, chapter 5, for next week. It's very, very useful. And this is the sort of book that it's a treasure. So you open it and you read it at various moments in your life. And you don't have, I'm not saying you don't have to read the whole book. You don't have to read the whole book every time you open it. Just read a couple of paragraphs and see them as instructions to do some meditation and reflection. So it really is a remarkable resource. So once I attended an initiation, a high Agriva initiation in Sydney at the Vajrayana Institute, and we gathered for the teaching in a small community hall at 7 o'clock in the evening. And we were still sitting there at 4 a.m. the next day, because Lama Zopa Rinpoche was teaching about guru devotion before he gave the initiation, which from memory took, I think, maybe 30 minutes. So Rinpoche was saying that it was more important for us to sit there together and listen to these teachings for hours than it was, of course, I'm not saying that they were competition, but that was so important for Rinpoche to do that before he gave the initiation. So it's really very inspiring, and how important these teachings are. So thank you very much, everyone, for sharing.
Thank you.